Welcome, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, to Mea Culpa. Wonderful to have you on. The hour goes by incredibly quick, so Professor, I do have to jump right into it. Jeff, for years, you have criticized The Apprentice as a masterclass in bad management. And in your book, Firing Back, you called it a perfect example of how not to run a business. Now, fast forward to Trump's second term, we're watching the same ruthless, TV-driven ethos playing out in real time. Firing key figures like FBI directors and so on. And this, I'm going back to, of course, the first term, but simply for perceived loyalty issues. So my question to you is, how much of the disastrous decision-making that we're seeing now in government can be traced back to the same toxic, spectacle-driven mentality that defined The Apprentice?
You phrased that just so well. And yeah, there's the book, Firing Back, as you mentioned, Harvard. But the thing that, even though it's in there, as Michael, you know so well, he doesn't read anything. So there's a really nice endorsement there that despite me having said that, what did your friend, President Donald Trump say? Sonnenfeld has written an insightful, inspiring book. Adversity is the best test. It can be the harbinger of defeat, catalyst for greatness. That fine line is carefully examined in this significant and entertaining book. Firing Back should be read by anyone who has success in their agenda. Michael, you must have written that for him. I don't know.
Actually, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I did. I think Meredith MacGyver did. But the problem is you're right. Neither of them read the book. Had they read the book, they would understand that it was not complimentary to him or of course to the Apprentice.
It was rather courageous to send it his way to see what he thought of it. And so that was, and he didn't even charge me for the endorsement or ask for a commission later. But Michael, yes. Is when Jeff Zucker in his pre-CNN days was the head of all of NBC Universal, he asked if I would. He was in charge of, of course, a new TV series called The Apprentice that they had lifted from a British parallel of the same design, and a producer well that was doing Survivor. They hired away from who was doing the CBS show Survivor. It was Jack Welch's idea that he wanted NBC, which was owned by GE at the time, and Jack Welch, of course, was then CEO of GE, wanted that show. So they took that same elimination game setup and put it in a business setup. But it was unbelievably and unimaginably brilliant that they should have cast Donald Trump in the role, because it's so fit his exact nature. Is that the premise of the show is what I complained about, because I was writing a column each week for the Wall Street Journal critiquing each episode. They'd send it to me a day in advance. And what it showed is the exact wrong way to run a business organization, or of course the United States government. I referred to it in the first review as a musical chairs game at a Hooters restaurant, which Trump didn't like it very much. He insisted that ABC, the NBC, and the Wall Street Journal break off the relationship. I said, fine, I don't need to do this. But the Wall Street Journal said they're getting so much traction. Would I take a look at the next week and maybe rescind what I'd written the prior week? And then Trump said, yeah, okay, if he recants what he wrote. Of course, I said I'd make no commitments. I'll look at the next week. I looked at it, and he didn't review what I was going to write for the next week either. And I said, last week I said that was the worst possible portrait I could imagine on TV, and would I rescind what I wrote last week? And I said I do rescind what I wrote. And Mr. Trump is right, is because I said that about last week's show, the worst possible portrait of leadership on television, business leadership. But I hadn't seen this week's episode yet. This one's worse. So we were off and running at that point, and he was threatening me, and as you could imagine. All kinds of litigation, and we ultimately, believe it or not, buried the hatchet at Trump National Golf Course. I took my wife, who's a single-digit handicap golfer, and I knew she would beat him on the first 3 holes. He quit. She did, and he told her how much she resembles Melania, who was only his fiance at the time, and gave her some clubs and shoes. And as you know, as he can be on one-on-one interactions, she was completely charmed by him. And he said, well, what's it take to win you over? And I said, oh no, I can't be bought. And she starts kicking me, my wife, under the table. Find out how much. And I said, look, it's a problem. It's the premise. It's an elimination game. And this gets back to your opening question. This divide and conquer elimination game. I said, why don't you get some, I said, you have nobody to lead your organization because you only survive by your having your team kill each other off. And that's the premise of the show, is an elimination game, the musical chair setup. And he said, well, that's kind of the premise that Jack Welch gave me from Survivor, the show that we stole, with the same producer, as you know, Mark Burnett, guiding it. So I said, why don't you take these fallen celebrities that nobody likes? I said, Joan Rivers or Jackie Mason. I've always hated ethnic humor, and Andrew Dice Clay, and they all deserve each other. I didn't think of Snooki and the other people they came up with for Celebrity Apprentice, but that was the origins of the Celebrity Apprentice. I said, if you morph to that, I'll go silent. We became friends. And he said he wanted to come to our CEO Summit. So we invited him to one but long before the World Economic Forum was founded, or Forbes, Fortune, Business Week, the New York Times, or anybody, I created the world's first school for incumbent CEOs. We held it, this particular one, at the Waldorf. Trump walked in the door. All the top people, many of them are people whose names are in the headlines right now as people flocking to Mar-a-Lago, said, if he walks in the door, we're walking out. Michael, guess what? He walked in the door of the Waldorf coming in right off of Park Avenue. And that top tier of major CEOs walked out. They said he's not part of our group. He doesn't run a major international public company. He runs a family tribal business, and we don't like his style or his antics. And he was kind of mad. But yeah, that's the setup, is his modus operandi, as it was on The Apprentice, was divide and conquer, whether it's China versus Russia, which hasn't worked out for him, Mexico versus Canada, which he does manage to manipulate, and France versus Germany, or breaking up different pieces of the Republican Party. He hasn't managed to create a lot of fissures in the Democratic Party, but he forever tries by, flattering Bernie Sanders or whatever, as he is constantly trying to find ways so that everybody is at war and they have a filial piety back to him.
Yeah, well, it's true. Look, you've often warned about leaders who prioritize loyalty over expertise. In this administration, let's just take Scott Bessent for a second, hedge fund billionaire who is at the helm of the Treasury. To you, does this scream the fox guarding the hen house, or is this just the type of economic cronyism that we should expect when Trump is in charge?
You'll be so mad at me because you picked one of the few examples where I think the American public is fortunate to have him there. Believe it or not, despite Saudi money and all kinds of other things, I think in Trump administration 1.0, we were way better off to have Jared Kushner there, which you would ask a lot of questions about family ties and all the rest. Is that Scott Bessent is a smart, stable, honest broker who's been able to hold the tide against Howard Lutnick, who would fit what you were describing there. Similarly, Jameson Greer, who's the trade negotiator, who theoretically and improperly has to report to Howard Lutnick, has survived. So Jameson Greer, as the head trade negotiator, as well as Scott Bessent, are some of the few bright, shining stars in this administration. Admittedly, this is not a galaxy of a lot of stars, but if we have to put our hopes on somebody, it's amazing that they got through. I think the Secretary of Transportation impresses me each day. And by the way, these are the exceptions, not the norm, that somehow some reasonable people got through. But it'd be horrifying if the loud Fred Flintstone like Howard Lutnick was truly running things, as he was briefly, and Peter Navarro, who is a special advisor to the president, as you know. And I'm sorry to say I introduced Peter to Donald Trump, even though Jared Kushner thinks he did. Is that I actually showed them that the two books that Peter wrote, Death by China and The Coming War with China, I gave to Trump, and forged that relationship through Wilbur Ross as well to Trump with Navarro. Navarro is a hothead on these things. So every now and then he gets it right, but he's a broken clock. He gets it wrong a lot. And same Same with Howard Lutnick, and there are many people far worse than these two, but Stephen Miller and others. But I do think that when he sets up these Dear Leader meetings where they go around the table in those cabinet meetings,
it's great, isn't it?
Well, it's just it's an insult to rising economies to say that it's a third world or this kind of thing. Is that this is something that is just horrifying to see, because another thing that he does, Michael, which is a device that he's used around you a lot. When you think of the portfolio of who you were his personal lawyer, you were general counsel to the organization, but you also had an awful lot of operational duties and things. It was a vast, and he's doing that right now. If we take a look at Marco Rubio and others, that he's given them a giant portfolio of activities to look after, and many in this interim basis. And he loves to hire people to actually serve in an unconfirmed interim role. So all they have is their dependence upon him, and again, to now your fantastic this next question, none of them are anchored in expertise, so that they given a wide portfolio of areas where they're amateurs. They don't know. So they don't have professional networks. They don't have technical language. Is that when Mad Dog Mattis was sitting at the cabinet table as secretary of, and I guess he didn't love that term, Mad Dog himself, but when General Mattis was sitting at the table as secretary of defense, and they'd go around the cabinet meetings, he wouldn't swear his filial loyalty and his gratitude to serve Donald Trump. He would regularly say it was a great honor. It's a great honor to serve the American public. And Trump didn't like that, but he was anchored with his credibility as somebody who really knew about diplomacy, military strategy, had great networks and contacts. He was independent of Trump. Trump wants people who are completely reliant upon him for their position, for their prominence, and for whatever authority they have. But if these people have great expertise, not only do they know things that Trump doesn't know, which he doesn't like, but they also have authority to counter him.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning Sean Duffy, Secretary of Transportation. What was that thought?
Well, the point there is he's somebody, I guess, is another former Fox people. There are some 20 of them in the cabinet, whatever.
21, I believe.
He's 21. That's good for you. I think we're ready for your next bestseller book because you're going to have plenty more to critique in Trump 2.0 as it unfolds. So I want to have a front row seat and fasten my seatbelt to read your next great insightful piece coming out on this administration. But Sean Duffy has impressed a lot of the airline CEOs and actually people across parties, because he this week in particular, as we're seeing problems in Newark, we saw problems in Philadelphia, we saw the problems in Atlanta, is air traffic control problems. He's not laying at the feet of one part or the other. He's not doing Biden bashing. And in fact, he seems to be trying to solve things in a non-partisan or bipartisan way, and drawing in expertise, which I didn't realize he had. So he is, again, one of those 3 or 4 exceptions in this administration that I admire. And I don't know how.
I'm shocked. I'm actually shocked to hear you say that, because, we're talking about in just the last week alone, I think there were more than 9 mishaps in terms of aviation during the entire, I think it was, they far surpassed the number of aircraft mishaps so far in the first 118 days than the entire Biden administration.
No, it's very troubling. But I would lay that at the feet of Elon Musk, who wound up savaging so many agencies, including this one. Right. We had the same, and you could fault Sean Duffy for not speaking up sooner. Even Marco Rubio in state, as Secretary of State, and Scott Bessent, of course, as you mentioned, Secretary of Treasury, ultimately voiced disagreement with Musk and came around to defend the remaining shreds of the experts in their respective organizations. And maybe Sean Duffy was late to the party to do the same thing. But I believe Elon Musk's reckless Doge efforts. Elon Musk has never turned anything around. Elon Musk is a brilliant engineer who's been a successful builder of a few businesses, but he also seems to have a Trump's desire for grandiosity, for prominence, and for being spread too thin in areas where he doesn't have expertise. You look at Neuralink, you think anybody would have their nerve to invest in this company, Neuralink. What have they produced? The company, he's a CEO of that, a CEO of the Boring Company. Well, you do have to give him credit. This is Musk now. Give him credit for truth in advertising. At least the company lives up to its name. It's a boring company. They haven't produced anything of what they said they're going to. Where are those 22 cities that 7 years ago he said they're going to have tunnels connecting Las Vegas and Los Angeles and all this other stuff? And, for that matter, it's 4 years ago that we're supposed to have already delivered that fleet of 1 million robo-taxis. Other companies are way ahead of Trump on this, both in the technology and the execution of Musk on this front. But it's a similar style that he has. He's just a hell of a lot, obviously, smarter than any of us, including Trump, Musk, that is. But Musk was on a destructive rant when he started tearing through the government, pulling things apart. Why get rid of all these loyal FBI agents as they are experts in technological surveillance and cultural and political issues around the world, leading to our protection? And while they're in overtime as volunteers drawing bodies out of the Potomac River after an unfortunate mishap, these people are getting fired. FBI people, they're not partisan. And the CIA people, the cybersecurity people, the White House is being attacked every 38 seconds. It's experiencing a cyber attack. And we're laying off people from our cyber command, shutting it down, in a good faith effort, supposedly with Russia. Where's the good faith from Russia back this way? So it is absurd. And getting rid of the inspectors general, I think it's really frightening what we're doing on national security. And you wonder what's happening on that front. And the air traffic control system is part of that. And Sean Duffy probably should have screamed more to protect those people, because it's hard finding them now, just like it's hard to find people for nuclear safety who were let go.
Sure. So let me ask you this, since you are a professor right now at Yale University, probably the most prestigious school in the world, Linda McMahon is now the Secretary of Education. It's almost fucking funny, to be honest with you. If you think about it, it's you couldn't write this better if this was an SNL skit or a South Park type episode. We're talking about someone who ran a business, the World Wrestling Federation, that preys on working class families. She's now got control over the education of our children. I mean, it's perfect if you want to teach them how to pile drive somebody's head into the mat. But we're talking about education here. How do you, as a professor at Yale, reconcile this corporate background with the very real challenges of running a federal agency like the Department of Education that, in truth, should prioritize equity and access for every single student, not just the ones whose parents can afford a private education?
Yeah, I think it's really a shame. I grew up in the pre-WWF days when they really had competition in the wrestling space, and Gorilla Monsoon was infamous for putting on hiking boots and stomping on people's backs, and that was entertainment. And I don't know. I guess Gorilla Monsoon is just too old to get a cabinet position. But I don't. You think Hulk Hogan should be pretty mad. We haven't seen him get his position just yet. But Jesse Ventura would have been a good choice. But he was smart enough and became a governor, of course, to challenge the WWF group. But Linda McMahon, I know her personally. She's a nice lady in one-on-one situations.
Yes, she is. I've met her plenty of times too.
A very pleasant woman. She's not strong to challenge Trump in her past position. I think in small business administration, she was happy to get along by going along, but there weren't a lot of controversies there. And as far as I knew, she was supportive of small enterprise in that role. But I was served on a board of directors with her, and it's probably indiscreet of me to comment on another director, but I will. It was a university, it was the trustees of Sacred Heart University, where we had some difficult issues there. And I would talk with her privately about them. She had some good insights, but in the board meeting, she was painfully silent, deathly silent. and thinking, wow, if her husband Vince McMahon were there, he wouldn't be silent. But her style was very quiet, almost to the point of submissive, a sweet lady. But so she's doing what she's told, and using this battering ram of anti-Semitism against prominent universities when it's being used as a partisan tool is ridiculous. This is not to say that there weren't problems with Hamas support, violence, impeding the safety of students, especially Jewish students at a number of schools, taunting them, chasing them, and the acquiescence to genocidal language or whatever it was is horrific. And there was some real cowardice in higher education. So don't get me started on that front. There were people right to raise it. But going back a year and a half, 2 years, to say that the schools are now suffering from the same pathologies they showed then, and for her to mouth those lines it's really unfortunate, because Harvard in particular has become a lightning rod of criticism because it so threatens, symbolically and substantively threatens everything that Trump stands for. They celebrate expertise. They have freedom of thought. They're on the frontiers of knowledge. And just yesterday, they've cut off another, $450 million of funding. And now, it's been more than about $9.5 billion have been shut down that going into Harvard. And that's really a shame because it's, I think Harvard has probably, a fraction of the wealth that Elon Musk has. People talk about their endowment, and Harvard has been reliant on federal funding far less than Elon Musk had, and the public returns far exceed whatever Elon Musk has gotten from that investment of the tax dollar in terms of research and information technology and life sciences, and whether or not it's forms of cancer or Alzheimer's or all these different dread diseases. Is we need to be on a frontier of knowledge. And if you have some Looney Tune American Studies or humanities professor, you don't get them by throwing your virologist out on the street out of work. It's just absurd.
All right, fellas, look, let's cut the crap. You're in the mood, the lights are low, the music's on point, and suddenly, your little general decides taking the night off. Yeah, it happens. It's like trying to start a car with no gas. It's frustrating, it's humiliating, and honestly, it's kind of tragic. But here's the thing. You don't have to suffer through that sad sitcom anymore because HIMSS is in the game now. So men, if ED is getting you down, you need HIMSS to help you get your confidence and, other things back up. I mean, we're talking personalized, doctor-trusted treatments like Viagra, Cialis, even the chewable tablets, all available for up to 95% less. Yeah, 95% less than what you pay for at the pharmacy. And the best part, no awkward doctor's office, no pharmacy side-eye, no insurance hoops. It's all online, done from your couch, which, let's be honest, it might already be your battlefield or your disappointment. So you just fill out an intake form. It's easy stuff. And a real medical provider figures out the best treatment plan for you. And if prescribed, it ships discreetly and directly to your door for free. HIMSS is changing the way men deal with ED. And thank God, because the old way, it sucked. But this is fast, it's private, it's effective, and it works. So let's get real. This isn't just about performance. No, it's about taking control, about feeling like you again and showing up when it matters. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Cohen. That's HIMS.com/Cohen for your personalized ED treatment options. And the featured products include compounded products which are not approved nor verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
And she's willing to go along doing that. And that is ushering in an age of ignorance that feeds into a weird, almost unexpected and inadvertent conspiracy between the far left and the far right that Trump champions, and that is a basic disrespect for any institutions, whether or not it's religion. I mean, look at Trump parading around and the Pope's outfit when the poor man was just, about to be buried, and Trump saw him like that. How could he dress up in the Trump's garb? Shameful. But it's a populist sentiment. The populists on the far left of I don't know if it's Elizabeth Warren has sort of become that a bit. Bernie Sanders, they have a direct lineage to a guy named Eugene V. Debs, who created the American Socialist Party. He was a very effective, very admirable in many ways, but extreme labor union leader. Created the Wobblies, the IWW, and his counterpart on the right was a guy named Tom Watson from Georgia, a senator from Georgia, a publisher. He was anti-everything, anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, anti-Irish, anti-immigration. And they were both deputies in William Jennings Bryan's populist campaign of 1896, the last national campaign. So the populists, or the extreme left and right, were together. When I went to see Trump with a left of center political scientist from here in Trump Tower in 2016, it was late 2015, he told me that he had already announced that he was running at that point. This was about August 2015. And he told us, to the amazement of my colleague, who actually thought Donald Trump had an ideology. He doesn't, as you know. It's about greed and grandiosity and power. It has nothing to do with politics. He said he's thinking of going to the left of Bernie Sanders. Only, Michael, only you on this show would know that that's true. Most people viewing this would say, oh, no, he's a conservative. But as you could scream from the mountaintops, he is nowhere near a conservative. He's not for, limited government or any of these other conservative values or family values. What's his family? The Manson family or the Adams family? I mean, what kind of family values is he talking about? But he wanted to go to the left of Bernie Sanders. And it must have been sometime after that your old friend Steve Bannon got to him and said, here's an express route by going to the right. But it was trying to tap into the disaffection in a larger population, which I have to say he does brilliantly. Nobody can read a crowd like he can.
Nope, I say that all the time. But I'll tell you something. You know who's not sitting back and doing nothing? Who's not just capitulating to Donald Trump's whims or desires?
You.
Well, you too. But I'm referring more to Jerome Powell, who's still at the Fed, despite the ongoing, consistent, constant attacks from Trump. But with the administration pushing hard for interest rate cuts as inflation lingers, isn't Powell just a pawn in Trump's bigger game? I mean, should the Fed be 100% completely independent, or is it now just a tool for political theater and short-term gain?
By statute, by good governance, and by good sense and international expectations, we want our monetary policy, which is controlled by the Federal Reserve, to be separate. That's the way it's been set up since whatever it was, 1914 or wherever, to have an independent Federal Reserve. And that's what has made, in part, the U.S. the envy of the world, that they can trust we're not manipulating the currency and the money supply for political returns. But you're right. He has been a standard bearer. And this is it is so interesting the way you phrased it, because you got the nuances so efficiently. It's a double-edged sword. You want his independence, but there's one more in that toolkit that Trump has. It's a limited toolkit. One of the major pieces we talked about at the beginning of this discussion is divide and conquer. And he loves that, to constantly have people fighting each other, because he's afraid of coalitions. Coalitions, NATO, NAFTA, Republican Party, the Business Roundtable, coalitions bring him down. Any bully knows you got to divide and conquer. Another thing he does is he has these people that don't know what they're doing, with huge job definitions, many different fields reporting into them that they don't have the mastery in. So he destroys expertise. So that filial piety of everybody is in an interim tentative role, depending on all their authority emanating from him. That's the second thing he does. But the third thing he needs a foil. That's the third piece of the ingredient. Michael, we should probably write this up ourselves so this show's over.
I think so, right?
because the third pillar is that he relies on, and this is right out of George Orwell, but which he's not read, but he didn't need it. You know, there's something else which he does, by the way, which lots of scholars studied here at Yale in the School of Mass Communications, just as an aside, in the 1930s, is what's called the sleeper effect. They saw in the 40s, and that Goebbels and Hitler did this well. Hermann Goebbels and Hitler as communications chief, was you constantly repeat false information, but you constantly, unrelenting, repeat. Eventually, the message lingers, and any question about the source drops away, but the message lingers. These are things. It's brilliant that he does these. There are a half dozen of these things, and I trailed off to tell you about the sleeper effect one, but the use of an external scapegoat is and to vilify. He thrives on that, and that's right out of George Orwell in 1984. And that's what he does. And Jerome Powell falls into the trap. You'd say, well, maybe he should be acquiescent then. No, he's got to do what he's doing, but he also has to prepare. He has to have constituencies ready to defend him with fact, to diminish the fiction that somehow he's doing something wrong. And it should come from unlikely places like me or people who know more than I do about this, like, say, Jeremy Siegel at Wharton, who have the wherewithal to defend them, who've been critics, like I have been as a non-expert on Fed policy, been critical of 17 successive price hikes in a single year under Biden. It was excessive. They were out of control. They were making mistakes. It was basically supply chain hiccups that were working their way through post-COVID shutdown. The economy was completely shut down. So when they reopened it, of course, we had surges and log jams. We had 72 ships, whatever, in the Los Angeles harbor waiting to get in. We don't have that problem anymore. We did then. And the oil industry was completely shut down. Is oil, you talk about spikes in oil prices before, oil had gone to zero. They couldn't give oil away. Nobody wanted it. So of course, lots of prices were going up, and the Fed jacking up interest rates led to soaring home prices because of the mortgage issue that followed from that. It had nothing to do with Biden. And I was quite critical of Jerome Powell, for producing some weird aberrations in monetary policy that had nothing to do with anything the Biden administration could do, that manages the fiscal policy, which is taxation and spending and things. So Powell is imperfect, but he's honorable and he's smart and should be independent. And if he gets it wrong, we should be able to call him out and say, well, let's address that, but not to berate him, to attack his integrity, to attack his intelligence, which is ludicrous. Or to constantly threaten to try to remove him, which he can't for another 18 months as Fed chair. And Powell can stay on for a few years after that as a Federal Reserve board member. So it's a very dangerous thing. I'm glad you raised it.
Yeah, look, it's really no joke. But since we're talking about dangerous things, we're watching as Trump does this back and forth, in and out of tariffs. Now, it was 145% on China, started by him for no reason whatsoever. Now it's 30%, it's 20% on Chinese steel, 15% on German auto parts. Nobody's even sure what the numbers are, but he does this on and off again shtick. This time, though, Professor, he's not even bothering to consult Congress or industry leaders. He's just doing this on a whim. Is this the kind of reckless showmanship politics that we've come to expect? Or are we witnessing the beginning of an economic self-sabotage that's going to bite us in the ass for years to come?
It's extremely destructive. And what we are seeing is Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal has been very strong in calling this out week after week, day after day. They're out there pointing out this nonsense. The tariff tantrums were a mixture of grandiosity and idiocy. To say that we're getting revenue from this, that it's being paid by foreign governments, is completely false. No economist says that. No foreign governments are paying it. It's a tax on American consumers. And then the disruptive impact on supply chains is disastrous. As anybody from automotive to pharmaceuticals to whomever will say, it is frightening that perhaps 40% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs as they call it, that go into drugs, comes from China, and perhaps 90% of our antibiotics come from China. They shouldn't. There are too much steels coming in from Canada, and as much as we love Canada, and I think it's crazy to attack our allies with punitive trade sanctions. There is an issue on steel and aluminum because they had, in the last handful of years, they have had 1,000% increase in exports to the U.S. Well, they didn't have 1,000% increase in production. Obviously, it's passing through from somewhere else, whether or not it's from Russia or China or Europe or wherever. There's a dumping problem, and almost all CEOs, 85% of CEOs major CEOs tell us, there need to be selective tariffs. And that's what Biden was doing on chips and some other things with China. Selective tariffs make sense. However, this cross the board temper tantrum issues with him saying he's got 200 deals done when there only are 160 countries the United Nations recognizes, and whether and they start to talk about sub deals. So who are the sub deals? Is it with Blimpies, or is it with Subways, or what? Who's the sub restaurant that they're talking about he's doing these deals with, or
McDonald's,
or is it another Antarctic penguin location that he's doing the deals with? But it's ridiculous. But they're by his own creation. My dad used to tell me about a friend of his that used to have really bad migraine headaches. And what he would do is he would go to a wall and pound his head against the wall. And then he'd stop. He'd say, I feel so much better now because I stopped pounding my head against the wall as a distraction. Well, Trump creates this self-destructive stuff. And I guess, in fact, we should add to our toolkit of the Donald Trump toolkit. We have 5 things. What's a sixth one? The sixth one is that he likes the distraction of the shiny object, to constantly start other brush fires that are so outrageous that you turn your head away from the ones that were so upsetting just moments ago. And perhaps a seventh aspect to put in this toolkit. Here I said it was such a simple toolkit, and I'm now making it seem like it's more sophisticated.
Right. This is going to, by the time that you finish with it, Professor, you're going to have like a 42-piece toolkit.
Well, I think it's fewer than 10. Is in addition to the sort of the distraction, which is a big one, is that he starts a negotiation. And again, I'm telling this to somebody who knows this better than anybody on the planet. And if you tell me I'm wrong, you'll just ruin my day. But because you'll be wrong, and you never are. Is that he starts a negotiation not the way other negotiation people. I've got all these books here about negotiation. They're talking about building trust. I used to be a Boy Scout, an Eagle Boy Scout, that you start a fire with tinder and kindling, and you start to get some little brush going, and then you put on some twigs and then some branches, and then you wait for that big thick green log to put on after you built a foundation of trust, and then the fire is going. Trump, he starts out, as we see right now with these tariff tantrums, he takes that big green log and he smacks you in the nose with it right from the start, so that everything else after that seems reasonable.
Right. It's very, very true. Look, let me ask you this, because you've been a strong, and when I mean strong, I mean a very strong advocate for the idea that leadership should be about serving the public good. But when we look at Trump's, for example, immigration policies, more ICE raids, more deportations, and zero care for families being ripped apart, what does it say about his leadership skills? Does he care more about winning elections or winning a fight than about governing with humanity?
Yes. If you take a look at we've studied the key aspects of charismatic leadership at the top of organizations for CEOs and others at the top, government agencies, heads of state. One of them is personal dynamism, that you break through the clutter of language and that you're everywhere. He's annoyingly good at that. I don't know anybody better at being he's omnipresent. Look at the energy he has, just, but he's everywhere. He really gets around. And as the Sultan of insult, he cuts through the clutter. He uses vivid, evocative language. Okay, so personal dynamism, he's got that mastered. A second dimension, though, is the one you're talking about, which is empathy, the caring dimension. That's not there at all. Maybe he cares about some of his kids. I don't know. You tell me. You know better. But he certainly, when you take a look at the veterans today, this morning, that are up in arms, literally, so upset because he is sending back Afghan refugees here, or is threatening to do so, to tear up their immigration status and to let in white South African bars, because he says, well, these white, with no evidence of this, these white South African farmers are being threatened by the South African government, which is now, largely black led, and it's to have this racial consciousness driving immigration policy. And these Afghans who were critical as translators and others to help our soldiers in Afghanistan or elsewhere, it's horrible to see where they can't go back to the Taliban. What they'll be slaughtered in a second. Is this very cruel policy on immigration, not to mention, the family separation and the rest, and when the administration admits that a Venezuelan who's sent off to a cruel, weird a prison camp in El Salvador by mistake, and even the Supreme Court says bring him back, and he won't do it. It's quite the standoff. Like, it's not a question of whether or not we're approaching a constitutional crisis. We're in it. There's an article that just came out with a very conservative judge, Judge Ludig, and Michael J. Ludig, just in the Atlantic. And that article basically says this is a president that doesn't believe in rule of law. And what CEOs tell us, they don't believe in investing where there isn't rule of law. They don't want the rule of the rule of leaders, but the rule of law. And
it creates that uncertainty that their markets just don't take into consideration when they're balancing their budgets and doing their investment strategies.
Right, and that's another problem with the tariff issues that you remind me that I could have mentioned a few minutes ago, is the volatility of his head-spinning changes of direction make it impossible. If you're going to relocate an auto plant, it's tens of billions of dollars, and it takes 5 years to build it. If you even want to reposition an existing one, it'll take 2 to 3 years. People aren't going to put in that kind of money if we're being whipsawed around like this. And take a look at Apple, which was being heavily pushed in Trump 1.0 to take all these manufacturing facilities out of China and move into Vietnam, as they were doing. And now Vietnam being hammered, is they're thinking, what the heck? Where are we supposed to? What did you want? So it's very hard. And you have this, grandiose overstatement too, where he has these showcase events. Yesterday he said we're getting $600 billion of Saudi investment. Well, it turns out it could be half that. It's like this Saudis are working on $600 billion of perhaps of trade with us, but half of that's going back to Saudi Arabia, something of that nature. And there's always less there than meets the eye. And that's the same thing about these announcements about this new investment in America by chip makers and things, and the Taiwan semiconductor construction that's happening outside of Arizona. I went there. I visited there 2 years ago, and I know the president of Taiwan Semiconductor, and this the CHIPS Act had nothing to do with Trump. In fact, he's tried to derail it, and the Biden administration should be taken to task for being too slow to release the funds. Only 5% of the funds that the Secretary of Commerce, in this case, Gina Raimondo's bureaucracy, should have released. And I don't know how much of it's accountable to Janet Yellen and Treasury, but I know that Commerce had created an excessive bureaucracy that didn't release the funds, and it in part cost the CEO of Intel his job, because he worked so well with the administration. They were too slow to let Intel ramp up for domestic production.
This episode of Mea Culpa is brought to you by Graza, my new favorite olive oil. It's fresh, it's never blended, and it comes from a single type of olive, the Picual, straight out of Jaén, Spain, where over half of the world's olive oil is produced. So why Graza? Single origin goodness, that's why. Only one olive from one region. No mysterious blends. That means a traceable, a fresher product without mixing in any low grade or unknown oils. It's super fun. It has squeeze and spray bottles too. So there's no more messy tins or drippy spouts. Just aim, squeeze, and go. I mean, there are 3 types for any task that you have. One, they have something called frizzle. That's their newest, with a higher 490-degree Fahrenheit smoke point, which is perfect for frying, crisping, or grilling. Sizzle at 410 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an everyday cooking oil for roasting, marinating, and sauteing. Then they have something called drizzle, which is a bold, a punchy finishing oil that you sprinkle on your salads, you dip your bread in, or even you top it off on your ice cream. Look, let me be clear. My daughter is the actual chef in the house, and she uses olive oil on everything, from pastas to preparing steak. I mean, not only does this cook well, it smells delicious. Plus, as a healthy eater, Graza's extra virgin oils, they are loaded with those heart and brain friendly polyphenols. So it's good for you. Look, so here's what you get. You get 10% off your first order on Graza's site. But I personally suggest grabbing the trio. That's all the 3 squeezy bottles, the sizzle, the frizzle, and the drizzle, so that you're set for every style of cooking. So head right now to graza.co and use code Cohen to get 10% off of Trio, which includes, again, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle, and get to cooking your next chef-quality meal. Again, head to Graza, graza.co, and use code Cohen, Cohen, to get 10% off the Trio. And I love saying it, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle. So get cooking now. You ever stand in a grocery store staring at a piece of fish, wondering if it's going to taste like the ocean or like regret? Well, I've been there. And after everything I've seen, after everything I've done, trust is a luxury, especially when it comes to what I put on my plate. And that's why I'm telling you straight, Wild Alaskan Company is the only seafood that I trust, period. End of story. I mean, when that first box showed up at my door, I was skeptical. I mean, wild caught, perfectly portioned, frozen right off the damn boat. I mean, it sounded too good to be true. But I opened it. I cooked up some coho salmon, pan-seared with a little olive oil and some sea salt, and I swear to you, I haven't looked back. The flavor? It's clean, rich, real. It's the kind of fish that makes you realize just how bad that you had it before. And here's the kicker. It's 100% wild caught. There's no antibiotics, no GMOs, no factory farming, just fish from pristine Alaskan waters that's caught with care, shipped with purpose, and meant to be savored. Every single bite supports sustainable fishing communities. I mean, for God's sakes, it's seafood with a soul. So listen, not all fish are the same. And if you want seafood that you can trust, go right now to wildalaskan.com/Cohen and get $35 off your first box of wild caught greatness. That's Wild Alaskan, WILDALASKAN.com/Cohen. There's no risk, no BS, just the best damn fish that you'll ever eat. And let me say this. Thanks again to Wild Alaskan Company for sponsoring this episode. Now go eat like you mean it.
But the plans are old and the investments had already started, and Trump parachutes in after the fact and he's taking credit for it. Like it just magically happened right now. And that's creates so much noise. The press can't unpack it all.
Yeah, but that's all about Trump's America First agenda. And unfortunately, with that agenda of America First, this is exactly what happens when corporations are forced to choose between principles and political allegiance. That's the way I see it. What about you?
And you got to wonder, where's the Business Roundtable? speaking up on behalf of these CEOs. Because amazingly, the historically extremely conservative National Association of Manufacturers, which was in favor of the Vietnam War, they were not big in the environmental movement. They were not certainly on the front lines of civil rights issues. But they represent a large group, thousands of manufacturers. They have their voice. Their CEO, Jay Timmons, has been very, very critical of the Trump administration, and the manufacturers have stood with them. It's just fantastic. The automotive industry, pharmaceutical industry, they've had effective trade groups. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a very complicated organization to coordinate because you have businesses large and small, old and young, all parts of the country. It's huge. It's almost like being president yourself. They have so many constituencies. Even they are being very well led and coming out with some voice and strong positions, especially on the trade and tariff front. The Business Roundtable, I believe, is undermined by the staff. It's only, and I mean this not facetiously, but literally only 200 companies. It's a very limited constituency. And of those 200 companies, 170 of them, 175 are very large major companies. It used to be all 200 of them were the largest companies. Now they've made some exceptions, but of those 175 companies, and the board is excellent there, but the staff doesn't want any controversy. I don't know, perhaps because you get some nomadic people that are hop around from trade group to trade group and don't want to, as K Street lobbyists, don't want to get caught up in any controversy or means more work or whatever it is. But you can see that some trade organizations actually undermine the voice, because if these CEOs get together with collective action, as they do periodically, it's extremely effective. And that's in part why Trump did blink. There's no doubt about it, by the way. Trump blinked when it comes to China and elsewhere. He blinked. It was all bark and no bite. Now unfortunately, there's still a lot of friction there on the trade front, as you said, when, a half hour back. But he's certainly been backing down, and he'll back down more.
Yeah. Well, look, you've written about the dangers of a president who seeks to isolate America from the world. With Trump's withdrawal from multiple international agreements, what's the long-term impact on American diplomacy? And are we seeing the birth of a dangerous isolationist future? Or do you think this is just some temporary posturing for Trump's ideology of domestic win?
Well, CEOs are not xenophobic. Xenophobia is the term for being anti-immigration. This is a land of immigrants. If you take a look at the Fortune 500 firms out there today, half of them are created by either immigrants or first generation CEOs.
Yeah.
So that's Fortune 500. You hot dogs, hamburgers, American pie, the song "God Bless America." All these iconic symbols of American patriotism are all given to us by immigrants. The hot dog, the hamburger, God Bless America, apple pie, that didn't originate here. So all these symbols have come from elsewhere, and this is a great melding of great cultural contributions from all over the world. And that's just on the xenophobic, the immigration front. They also aren't protectionists. They believe we're in a global economy. We have a flow of goods. Now, I agree that the 18th century economist David Ricardo overstated things by suggesting in this what they called the theory of comparative advantage that was pushing for pure free trade. I think we needed to watch out for some countries that can try to corner markets and create monopolistic control. And we needed smart trade policies that aren't naive to have realistic fair trade rather than necessarily pure free trade, but they're not protectionists. And then finally, to your opening point on this, is they are not isolationists. Is America as number one? That was Charles Lindbergh's and the American Nazi Party's view when they existed. Is that American isolationism isn't America first? It means that's America alone. America alone is not sustainable. You can't take on abuses by China with America alone. We need our allies. Canadians, Mexicans, the EU, the UK. These have been our greatest friends, our greatest allies. But do you ever see Trump take on the tyrants of North Korea, Russia? I mean, we haven't talked at all about the past, that for whatever reason he gives Vladimir Putin. And you educate me to tell me that it isn't that there is something that Putin has that is so reputation damaging that he holds over as a sword of Damocles over Trump. If you tell me that's the case, I'll trust you. That's the case. But he certainly has an affection for Putin that is hard to understand. And I think the Michael Cohen explanation is he just loves the tough guy, brutal, autocratic image, these tyrants wherever they are. And that if somebody were to argue that Putin has some defamatory information, you say, well, how do you explain North Korea then? How do you explain Hungary? And that would be your defense, saying, no, he likes them everywhere. And
everywhere, whether it's Orban, whether it's Duterte, whether it's Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, and it's funny because he never turned around and he never referred to, for example, Trudeau as my friend, right? And so on, but look at what he talks about when he talks about Putin. It's like, he knows that Putin is a tough guy. He knows Xi Jinping is a tough guy. He knows Kim Jong-un is a tough guy, or Orban. How many times have you heard him say, Viktor Orban? You all know Viktor Orban, right? Viktor, he's one tough cookie, right? He wants to be perceived as that tough cookie too. And so birds of a feather flock together is kind of like his ideology, where if you see them as being tough, well, then you need to see Trump as being tough as well.
Yeah, exactly. He loves that association. He identifies with those brute autocrats. He wants to be a king. That's not this country. Yeah. That's not our culture. That's not our constitution. And he has no respect for any of those elements.
Zero. So, Professor, look, the hour goes by, as I said, very quickly here. I could spend all time. You and I had a 3-day speaking tour at Yale. And this is kind of like a little personal to me. I truly enjoyed spending the 3 days with you and your team. I found that the response from the Yale students, the professors, the both undergrads as well as the business school, and even the alumni was remarkably intense and also diverse.
It was, and you're too modest. You're too modest, Michael. We didn't get bored for 1 second. I took you through a huge array of religious, intellectual, generational differences here. And in every constituency, you not only won them over, but I'll be very candid with you. Before an alumni group where you had fewer than 20% believed you before you started, you had 85% of them when we did a vote before and after. These people held nothing back. Anything critical they put out there, you won them over every constituency. If you had 15% might still be diehard Trump believers, the Michael Cohen, who I've come to know, love, appreciate, and admire, will think, what's wrong with those 15%? Instead of like, oh my gosh, look at this. You're never going to get 100%. Look at what I just turned around by just getting the facts out there. It was a huge success.
It was quite an experience. But what I really want to get from you is, what do you believe this widespread engagement reveals about the current climate at institutions like Yale regarding the intersection of ethics, personal accountability, and the role of higher education in facilitating difficult but necessary dialogue?
Well, with the presidential election problems in the succession in 2020, in the whole election denial period, I got a large group of CEOs to come together that were 60, 70% Republican to take strong positions and condemn. And when Biden-Harris won, they came out with an immediate salute to them, and they canonized the truth. What's very important is that universities, clergy, campuses, voices, trade union leaders, CEOs, but civil society take positions. Tocqueville said this. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French jurist, who came to this country in 1840, wrote a book, Democracy in America, where he said what's critical is not the tightness of our laws, it's the looseness of our laws. We adapt to changing circumstances, but how is the truth interpreted? That's where it falls to civil society to take positions. This baloney, this bull notion in college campuses of institutional neutrality, where boards suppress college presidents or boards of directors of companies say, stay in your lane. What lane is that? The breakdown lane? The strategic context of business is very important to their shareholders and their other stakeholders. The trade unionists that are afraid of their own constituencies, these community activist groups and national activists that are advocates that are also balkanized by their special grievances, they need to come together. We need collective action. And that's what worries me. And Tocqueville said it, is that it's by these groups speaking out, that's where we develop our greatest resource, which is public trust. He had a term for it. And he said that it is social capital, and the social capital is as valuable as is financial capital, if not more so. So we need these groups to come together, speak. And we're doing this even right now with universities. About a month and a half ago, I got 100 college and university presidents together, and we convened the group, and they took a strong statement of defiance against the Trump administration. And then we did a follow-up with equal number in support of Harvard as they're being attacked. And many of these people, such as me, were major critics of Harvard's governance just 18 months ago. But these are problems that they're making great progress on. Even the Anti-Defamation League says schools like Harvard have really addressed the problem very effectively. They have more to do, but they've come a long way. Is we need more of that kind of collective action. We need CEOs, but not just CEOs, everybody else. CEOs are just hired hands. Not too many of them are oligarchs that control their companies. Most of them are well-paid hired hands, but they need people in civil society to speak out.
Yeah, well, let me say, you're certainly one of those people, and I couldn't have been more proud to spend those 3 days with you and watch the cheers and the applause that you received, not just from the undergrad students, but from your business school students and the alumni. I mean, that was really fantastic. I never saw an auditorium filled to the rim, right, with standing room only in the back, literally just engaged with every single word that came out of your mouth. And,
thanks for saying so. It was like a carpet of humanity to see them there. It's so nice of you to say. And since you were an ambush surprise guest each time, this is the only thing that I want to say you deserve the credit for. You deserve the credit for winning them all over. But you were a surprise guest at every one of these packed forums. So that was so great. We ambushed them, and they fell for it every time, by the way. And even your mom, oh my gosh, your mom is the biggest star of all of us. Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, Professor, great seeing you, my friend. I will definitely be speaking with you shortly. And I truly look forward to my return back to Yale, because I could not have been more impressed with your program and the students.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor to join you on any occasion, especially this podcast.
Thank you, my brother.